big silence.
Hey, it's Karena here. Welcome back to the Big Silence Pod. I am just sitting here on my couch in my office at the end of a beautiful Tuesday. And I was sitting here just reflecting because I want to start the pod with this. Shout out. I don't know if you listened to the podcast with my friend Jenna Ballard who founded ALA, Ascension Learning Academy. But shout out to you and your team of 24 students. It was one of the largest fundraisers we've done for the Big Silence thus far. And from 24 strangers really putting their heart and soul for a mission that they believe in surrounding mental health and personal development. And just know to Jenna and all of your team and all of those who donate to the Big Silence, you are providing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people therapy for all through our programming. So thank you. And now, so this week's podcast, I'm very excited. When I heard I was going to be interviewing Kris Carr. I've been following Kris for many years. She has so many books. I can't remember the first one that I read. But then she came on and she's like, oh yeah, I've been following you and Tone It Up for years. And she does the app. And we just had such a great conversation. She's a New York Times bestselling author, wellness coach, a cancer thriver. She's also one of Oprah's Super Soul 100. She's a thought leader. Her new book is coming out, and I really connected with her on this since I am approaching the 2-year anniversary of my own mother's passing on September 15th, right before her book comes out on the 17th, I believe. And we talked about, all of her mourning and opportunities to mourn and how to turn that around. And the passing of her father recently. In this podcast, we talk about channeling fear and anxiety and the difference between getting over and getting through it, which I think is really important, and ways to deal with grief and loss and how it shows up in your body. I know a lot about that. It shows up in my body for real. But she has literally been someone who's had the rug pulled out from under her feet. She has been a stage 4 diagnosis for cancer for 20 years, and she is here making a difference in the world. Love you, Kris. Thank you for being on the pod and just sharing your beautiful purpose with everyone here. So listen up, and of course, share this podcast with a friend or a loved one who may enjoy it, and leave a review. Love you. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Kris Carr. We were just talking about how we've followed each other for many, many years. And it's an honor to have you on The Big Silence.
It's an honor to be here, Karena.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many similar, one part of your new book, I'm Not a Morning Person, is grief, which I want to get there and talk about that because I feel like in our friend group, age group, there's a lot more grief happening to all of us. So I think it's really important to open up and open that conversation. But first, I remember your story way back where you were diagnosed with cancer. Can we talk about that a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those, there were warning signs, and then you go straight into the heart of the wake-up call, and life changes. And in the beginning, it changes in such a big way, you don't think you're going to survive it. And then on the other side, it's like, wow, this was kind of this. There's so many wonderful things that came from the experience. And so I was in a very different career, living a very different lifestyle. Wellness was not even on my radar. Martinis and cigarettes and bad men and like all of the things. You know what I mean? I was just all the things, living in New York City. I was an actor and a dancer and photographer. And I was just, trying to get my career off the ground. And I figure I would figure out fiber later, right? But not now, baby, because I got big things to do. And then I wasn't feeling well for quite some time, but I kept sort of ignoring the symptoms, ignoring how I was feeling.
What were you feeling?
I had some pains and I had some, I had fatigue. I had some stuff that was going on that could have been something else, quite honestly. And so I just didn't really pay attention. The last thing you think is going to be incurable stage 4 cancer. I was 31.
Wow.
And then on Valentine's Day, I got the news because I finally hauled my ass to the doctor. I
Yeah.
got the news that I have a very rare and incurable stage 4 cancer. And that's when the journey began. That's when I really changed my life. I made a film about it. I've written lots of different books, some for cancer patients, some for folks interested in prevention. And I left my career and I started documenting my journey. In the beginning, I was given 10 years to live. The first doctor suggested a triple organ transplant. It was a lot of radical news coming my way really quickly.
Yeah.
And 20 years later, I still live with stage 4 cancer.
That's
So it isn't
amazing and
gone.
crazy. Crazy. I
Yeah, it can be at times.
That's wow. And so do you know what type of cancer or was just in
Yes.
your yeah. Can you share
Yeah.
that?
So,
Or yep.
yeah, I have a very rare sarcoma, which is a soft tissue cancer.
Mhm.
And, it can be aggressive, it can be slow growing, and it can change. So I have, I do feel lucky that it's been slow growing and pretty much stable for the last 20 years. And again, that could change
Mm.
sometime. But right now, today, I feel good. And I've spent the last 20 years teaching other people how to feel good, in essence.
What do you think the, like, maybe 2 or 3 major things and changes and shifts? I mean, obviously, stop smoking cigarettes and,
Yeah.
all those things, but, like, that you really started to focus on your health.
Yeah. So I radically changed my diet. It didn't change completely overnight because I had to figure out what to eat and
Mhm.
kind of teach myself how to take care of myself. Self care used to be, what do I eat to stay slim for my job?
Mhm.
So it would be like, oh, I'll just eat power bars, like 3 power bars and a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
it was bad because a big part of my career is I was a professional dancer. So
Right, there's a lot of pressure there on your body, and
tons of pressure, tons
I
of pressure.
was I was a model in my early 20s. I get it,
You
but
get it.
yeah.
Absolutely. So first it was like, okay, what should I actually eat? How do I nourish my body? And I think at the essence of what I practice and what I teach is an anti-inflammatory plant-based diet. So that was number one. Number two, like anybody dealing with a health crisis, diagnosis, a radical change in their life, a grief, big loss, all of the stuff that you so beautifully talk about and shine a light on and help people with. I really had to learn how to work with the fear and anxiety that
Mhm.
I was feeling as a result of living with something like stage 4 cancer. And so spending a lot of time learning how to work with those emotions, but also, in meditation and mindfulness and just finding ways and practices to kind of come back to the present moment when I would find myself spiraling
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole. So
One
that was
thing
a very big part too.
yeah, I'm going back to food, and you have a recipe book, right? Or a nutrition
I have 2 books.
2 books.
Crazy Sexy Diet kind of outlines,
Yep.
the plan, and then Crazy Sexy I have 3 books actually. Crazy Crazy Sexy Kitchen has a lot of great plant-based recipes, and then Crazy Sexy Juice is all like juice and smoothies.
You know what? Nutrition is so important. So, as you know, and we're going to get to you being a caregiver for your dad for 4 years, but I was also a caregiver for my mom the last 5 years of her life. And I was told by the doctors that she had 2 weeks to live. And I went to her cabin up in Washington and um, I saw just, microwave meals, crackers, beef jerky, vodka bottles, this, that. And so at the hospital, when they told me she had 2 weeks, I started bringing her green juice. And she was like, I'm like, and my mom couldn't even walk to her bathroom in her hospital room at that point. And she's like, ew, this is disgusting. I was like, just keep drinking it. And then I was like, once she was able to be out of the hospital after 3 months, and I had her with assisted care before I was able to get her on her own in her own home. And then she could walk again. She could move. I got her to like lift water bottles and like do all the things. And it's amazing how she then lived 5 years after
Ah,
a given 2 year or 2 weeks. So yeah, I think the importance and emphasis of healthy eating is really important to share and meditation. I mean, I want to get into. We can even talk about fear and anxiety, which is your chapter 3 in the
Mm.
in your book, and how calming your nerves and your body can be really healing as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, so we'll just jump to there. I had a little thing here. So I know before this, we were talking about like our age group and our friends. We are dealing with a lot of grief, a lot of more fear of health and this, and everyone's talking about, this and the difference between fear and anxiety. Can we talk about that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a quick step back because what I had talked about before we get into fear and anxiety, and the way my new book is broken down is each chapter, it's very story heavy because I love to teach through stories and my own experiences, but also each chapter is broken down into these are the types of emotions and types of experiences
Hmm.
you may have when the rug gets pulled out from under you. It's not all the experiences, but these are some common ones. And these were some common experiences for me and what happened, how I approached it, and how I was able to move through it, not get over it, but
Hmm.
move through it. Because I think there's a very big difference there. And what I talk about first is that each and every one of us, at some point in our life, we're going to experience some sort of what I call rupture.
Hmm.
And it's that moment when the shit hits the fan. It's that moment when things change radically. It's the moment you get the diagnosis. It's the moment, you lose a child. It's the moment you lose your livelihood. It's the moment your partner walks out. It's that moment where there's a rupture that happens. And sometimes when it happens, we may feel like this is too big to survive. And if I do survive it, I'll never be the same. And the truth is that we won't ever be the same. But there is an opportunity to keep growing and to keep living. And from what I have experienced, to continue to live fully,
Hmm.
really fully. And so that's the promise of this book. It's like, how do we cope when the big stuff goes down? And how do we come out or work with it or work through it in a way where we're able to fully integrate parts of ourselves? Maybe it's old wounds, maybe it's old griefs, maybe it's old traumas. And the truth is that life is a terminal condition. We're all going to die. Right?
Hmm.
That is, we're all going in the same direction, but how many of us are going to live along the way? And I've made such a deep commitment to myself to live by that motto.
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes you can go back to sleep. I've been living with cancer for 20 years. It's not something that scares me anymore. It was losing my dad that actually brought me back to, oh my gosh, if I were to calculate it, how many weeks do I have left?
Right.
My average lifespan is, let's say I live to 90. How many weeks have I lived so far? How many weeks do I have left? What are things I want to be doing with my time? What are things I really don't want to be doing with my time? And how can I like become a lot more connected to that? And so a lot of backstory there just to sort of say why are we talking about fear and anxiety, and maybe somebody doesn't necessarily connect to that, although I'd be surprised. Um, it
Well, a
is
lot of
really
people are just learning about anxiety too, and the difference
yeah,
between they have the fear versus anxiety, but maybe they don't have a name to it and they don't understand it.
yeah,
And once you understand, like, oh, this is anxiety, oh, this is fear, then you can navigate through it, in my
yeah,
opinion.
exactly, especially when those moments happen, right? And they're big, they're small. Like we don't ever want to compare our ruptures, compare our shit pickles, because like it does the shit pickle that you're experiencing an injustice. Like, oh, mine isn't as bad as hers, so what do I have to complain about? Like, no, we're not doing that, right? So let's talk about fear and anxiety. Um, we all have experienced both of them, and I think the most important thing is to understand that they're there to keep us safe. I'm not a fan of anybody who's like, hey, eradicate this emotion, become fearless. You can
Be a
completely overcome.
savage.
Yeah, be savage. Yeah, exactly. I'm
I
like,
have my
oh,
friends, they're like, "What's your savage? You're such a savage." And my husband's like, "Karina, you're not a savage. Like, you're a very soft, gentle, empathic person. So you don't call yourself a savage. You're a
it's
soft
very
savage."
sweet. I'm like, my savage is napping. I don't know.
Yeah. That's my savage activity for the weekend. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have all of these norms that we have to fight, quite honestly. We live in, I think, a very binary world where we're either like a savage or we're a loser. And that's just like so disruptive to me. But anyway, we know that these emotions are designed to keep us safe. Right? It's part of the evolutionary process that got us to where we are today. And that's why one of the things I talk about in the book is that we can't amputate any of our emotions and expect to be whole.
Mhm.
Right? We can't amputate the grief and expect to be whole. We can't amputate fear and anxiety and expect to be whole because they're there for a reason.
Mhm.
And so fear comes on usually in a moment. The deer jumps in front of you when you're driving.
Mhm.
Something happens and it startles you awake. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And oftentimes, like a fear hangover because of all of the stress hormones that flood your body to get you to do what? Fight, flight, freeze, or WTF if you're me, you
Yeah.
know? And so we could say, "Oh, wow, thank you, fear. This is what happens in my body. I start to sweat, right?
Mhm.
My heart starts to race. Like a lot of physical things happen in my body. Oh, thank you, brain. Thank you, body. This is what you do when I'm experiencing fear." Anxiety is very similar to fear,
Mhm.
except the difference between fear and anxiety is anxiety can be fear about something that may or may not happen.
Mhm. Oh, I know
Right?
it well.
You know it well. And so if it may not happen, what do we end up doing though? We end up potentially ruminating, spending time in that story, staying stuck in that mental process. And what I love when I'm working with my own anxiety is just to sort of say, is that happening right now?
Yeah. It doesn't
Could it? Yeah, could it happen in the future? Sure. But is cancer spreading throughout my body right now? Because like I could easily I had a fatty lump here. And I
Mhm.
remember when I felt it, I was like, that's it. It's end times.
Mhm.
Cancer spread, it's everywhere, and I met with my oncologist. He's like, sorry, but it's a fatty tumor. He didn't say
Yeah.
sorry. He's like, don't worry, it's a fatty tumor.
Yeah, I
Right?
have, like, little my dad gets them too, like, little fatty things, and, I'm like, "I'm dying," and the doctor's like, "It's where your fat is being deposited. You can remove it or you can leave it." I'm like, "Okay, I'm
You're
not
not
dying." Like,
dying.
yeah.
But see, what's so funny is our mind very rarely tells us the good stories.
Mhm.
It tells you that you're dying. And it does that because it wants you to take action, right? Well,
Yeah.
if you're dying, you better be hyper vigilant. You better figure it all out. You better double down. You better, I don't know, give away all your good jewelry. Instead of saying, okay, right now in this moment, I am not dying. What I
Yeah.
can do is make an appointment with my doctor just to check it out. But right now in this moment, there's tools that I can use to self soothe and bring myself back to center.
And what do you do?
For me, it will be a couple of things. And for me, it's usually just saying literally, oh, this is anxiety. This is what my brain does. Taking a few deep breaths. Also, and this is so up your alley, you can't always change the problems of the mind with the mind, right? So
Mhm.
movement,
Mhm.
go out for that walk. Go out, go do a 10-minute workout with you, and go on your toning up app. You got to change the fucking channel when it's coming in hard.
Yeah,
And I think movement is one of the best ways to do that.
absolutely.
Um, so those are just a couple of ideas there. Another thing that I do because I always will experience that sort of racing anxiety before like I get scanned every 5 years. So I have a scan coming up. So before that, I'm probably going to feel heightened anxiety and that's okay,
Mhm.
right? But I love to do mirror work.
Mhm.
So it's literally looking into the mirror and saying, I love you, Kris. I got you. No matter what that report says, no matter what the doctor shares, I got you. We're going to get through this. And just continuing to self-soothe and come back because I feel like for me specifically, when I'm flooded by emotion and I'm not able to manage my fear and anxiety, I abandon myself.
Mhm.
right? Because that is my generational trauma. So I completely check out, disassociate, and abandon myself in unhealthy ways. And that mirror work keeps me connected so that I don't.
It's so important too when you have that fear or anxiety come on to not abandon yourself. Do those things, whether it's moving your body, take a cold shower, meditate, like
Beautiful.
get in like um and I know I've learned like when I have PTSD and I've worked through some of it of the trauma with my mom. I've done like EMDR and all the therapies, but then I have other triggers from other things in life and I'm like this is what's happening. Tell my husband, I'm like, I'm starting to have a panic attack. I know I'm safe, but it's in my body. So now I have to like get it out and like calm my mind. And I've realized just recently too, like some other traumas that I need to work through. So I'm gonna go back to some of that therapy. But,
Beautiful.
but
I
yeah,
mean, I'll join you. We all have them.
yeah,
So, it's wonderful. I think the biggest thing is that it's beautiful that you're willing to not only share that, but then say, and I'm going to get support there because I know that support will help me feel better.
yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for anyone to not hold it in and to have that support. Number one, friends, family feel open about talking how they're feeling. Because I used to hide my anxiety too, because I thought there was something wrong. And like I would have major vagus nerve, like can't lift my arm, that stuff or nauseousness. But it gets better now because I'm like, I see you coming. I'm like, you're not gonna get me this time.
Yeah. I
But
love that.
yeah.
Another tip too that I want to just throw out there is, or a resource and person that I got a lot from when I was doing this, really the research of this book, because I knew these things on the periphery, but going through my own experience of loss recently and
Mhm.
then being willing to write about it made me go, all right, I want to explore this more and understand a lot more. But Dr. Judson Brewer,
Mhm.
I talk about him in the book, and he really breaks down anxiety in a way where he says that it can be almost like habitual, almost like it becomes habit forming, because
Mhm.
when we're constantly replaying those tapes,
Mhm.
we're just feeding it more. And it's just like every habit, it has a trigger, right? A
Mhm.
behavior and a reward. And the reward doesn't necessarily feel rewarding, but it could be that it has a result, right? So you're stressed at work. What do? You come home, you have a glass of wine. The stress is the trigger, the wine is the behavior. The result is you're, relaxing, numbing out, so forth and so on. But we know that if that's something that you're doing over and over again and maybe increasing the volume of it,
Mhm.
it's a habitual pattern that's resulting from stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
So I just share that because I think his work is really valuable. Not that all anxiety is like, oh, habitual. There is obviously full blown anxiety disorders, but I think that there's value there.
Yeah, definitely. Mentioned your grief and your father. Were you really close with your dad?
Yeah, very, very close. He was my chosen father. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Can we talk about grief because I think it's so important, because grief is not linear, and as you know, actually September 15th is my mother's 2-year, I don't know if you call it anniversary of passing, which is your book comes out September 19th. It's kinda but, um and, through therapy after my mom passed, I worked with a grief therapist, and she said, "Year 1, you're kind of numb and you're in this survival mode, and then actually year 2 is harder than year 1 because you have survivor's guilt." But I don't
Mm.
when did your father pass?
My father passed in 2021 in February.
Okay, so
So I
same,
guess I'm in 2.5 now.
yeah,
Is
and you
that
were
right?
caretaker to him. How was that?
Well, my mother was the main caretaker by far.
Yeah,
But I was a very big part of the experience of all the decisions that needed to be made. And, we moved closer to be closer to them, to be able to be more supportive, spend more time and so forth. And, um, I think because I had the opportunity to navigate all of the different things that were coming up for me emotionally along the way,
Mhm.
um, beginning with anticipatory grief,
Mhm.
feeling guilty to when we were even together, feeling some of the survivor's remorse that you mentioned when we were together, because I knew his disease was terminal and I could be having a conversation with him and thinking about when he wasn't going to be here, and
Mhm.
then feeling really guilty that I wasn't fully present, and that,
Mhm.
maybe my thoughts would manifest his early demise. You like go to all these different places. And so navigating anticipatory grief, navigating my own trauma around abandonment, because I met my biological father much later in life. And, our relationship ended as well, like for a second time after I met him. And
Mhm.
so, and then not long after that, he passed. So navigating some of my own trauma. And one of the things that my therapist shared that I talk about in the book is she said, when the grief train pulls into the station, it brings all the cars.
Mm.
And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, Carol, say all the things. What does that mean? Tell me. She said, it's the old stuff. It's old griefs that you don't even know are in
Mhm.
your body, that some of them you thought you were over. Like, wait a minute. Why the fuck am I crying about this thing? Like, I'm so
Mhm.
over that. It's the old stuff, but it's also the other emotions. And that's why I call it, braving loss, grief, and the big, messy emotions that happen when life falls apart. These other messy emotions that come with grief, like
Mhm.
rage. How much
Mm.
fucking rage was I feeling, So, that to your point, like started really doing the work, the grief work, long before he died.
Yeah.
Um, because I knew what was happening. And it was a loss so devastating to me that I was like, I can't do this alone.
There's a thing that comes up when you're, losing a parent, and it's a conversation that maybe a child or a partner or someone has to have with them when you finally have the courage to talk about death. I'm sure you had to have that conversation with your father, as I had to have it with my mother. It's a really hard topic to bring up, and no one told me how to do it or what to say. I just had to walk myself through it. Any
Mm.
advice there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's very brave that you even had the conversation, because I think more often than not, people who are dying may want to have the conversation. And it's the people who are living who are too afraid to do it because we're afraid we're going to get it wrong. Not everybody who's dying wants to talk about dying, but some do. And I think what will happen is the person who is going through that final transition can feel very other and very
Mhm.
lonely.
Mhm.
And so I started by having a conversation about the conversation.
Mhm.
So in my book, I call it talking about it.
Mhm.
And it was like the pre-show warm up. It was the dress rehearsal. It was, hey, dad. And I knew that this was something he wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to be able to have the talking about it conversation. But then as soon as I started to learn from the hospice nurses and hospice doctors and how they were being so candid and not like, oh, let's go in the other room with family members and not let the person who's dying hear any of this. It was like we were there, but they were talking directly to him. Like, do you know this is happening? We're here to tell you how it's going to go down. Like, these are the types of things that you're going to experience in your body. And I was so rattled by that because I couldn't, I mean, talk about a conversation about radical candor.
Mhm.
Like, we try to do that at work, but like I have never seen radical candor like that. And then in such a loving way too. And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah, hospice staff is I'm like I was talking to them at the hospital, because I was with my mom her last 3 days. I'm like, your job, like, you are so loving and caring, and you have death every day. Like, why how do you do it? Why?" And they're like, "Because we care and we've all experienced it, and we know
yeah,
how to walk people through it from family members to, anyone in hospice." So
Yeah.
shout out to hospice.
So such a big shout out. And now death doulas too. There's so
Yep.
many wonderful death doulas out there. And but anyway, I started by having the conversation and I said, I'm going to need tissues. There's going to be tears. I might not get it right. I'm scared, but I'm totally willing to have this conversation if that would be meaningful. And he said, yes, very meaningful, because as I shared earlier, he said, this can be really lonely. So that's how we started.
So you mentioned might not get it right. I've experienced as I'm fairly young. I know a lot of people lose their parents. I mean, I'm 42 now. I was 40 at the time, but I've had a lot of friends come to me and say, "Am I doing this wrong?" So,
Mm.
what to say and not to say when someone is going through something where, like we said, pulled the rug is pulled out from under you? And how do you support a friend when you haven't experienced it yet? Because I've had people who say, "When are you gonna get over it?" I'm like, this is like 3 weeks after when I've witnessed this and I'm laying on my couch still. I'm like, "Get the fuck away from me." Like, "Who the fuck do you think you are? Give me my time, my space, my grief." It was awful.
Yeah, that's what that chapter is all about. It's
Yeah.
called Awkward Times, Awkward People, right? And the truth is like, look, sometimes we're gonna be the awkward people. So there's certainly no shaming, but it is helpful to understand some of the things that you may hear that'll really be soul rattling, and
Mhm,
some of the things that, you may say if you don't know what else to say, because why I called it awkward times, awkward people is when we're scared, when we're nervous, when we're freaked out because we think we're going to get it wrong, we do awkward things.
mhm,
We put words together that are never supposed to go together, like what was said to you.
mhm. Yeah.
And so I give a whole list in the book, and I was giving a keynote recently, and I read from it, and there was just audible gasps in the audience because it sounded so harsh. But these things are so common, and so many of the people afterwards, and this was like 1,500 people, came up to me and said, "I've heard that and more, and just thank you for even putting those words out there." Um, when are you going to get over it? That's a big one, and you answered it earlier when you said there is no timeline.
Yeah.
And what I would say is there's no over, there's through.
Mhm,
This is a piece that I will always experience. I'll always experience grief around this. And that it doesn't mean I can't create joy around it, new experiences around it, meaning around it, fulfillment around it. But that piece, there's a wound there. It's like I'm always gonna feel the loss of my father.
yeah.
And that's okay. So to be expected to get with the program and get back to your normal, fluffy, fancy self is ridiculous. So
Yeah.
that we just have to understand. Sometimes, here are a few other ones. You'll have another baby.
Mm,
I wanted this baby. There's other fish in the sea. I don't want fish. I want my person. Um, everything happens for a reason.
mm.
God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I think that some people might say, like, but I really resonate with it doesn't happen to me, it happens for me.
I mean,
You
I
gotta,
always do say, because growing up with a schizophrenic mom and dealing with my own stuff because of that, I always say I don't regret. I can't change anything,
right.
and I love the woman I became because of the hardships I had. So, I guess in a way I would be like, I had to succumb to it. Doesn't happen to me, it happened for me. But I don't know who I would be, and even with I was with my mom her last few days, and she was all about regret, 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 and I just let her know that, like, she raised
Mhm.
but not being there necessarily, and it wasn't her fault what happened with mental illness, that she was able to raise a beautiful daughter, and she should be
Yeah.
proud.
Oh, that's just so beautiful that you were able to give her that experience. deeply, deeply beautiful
Yeah.
and deeply healing on levels that neither one of us can even imagine. Um, I think we just have to be thoughtful about what we say because we don't know the other person's beliefs. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would share is like one of the things that would come from me is say, why are you so upset? It's only a dog.
Mhm. I have 5 dogs and they are my children. Like, not just a dog over here. But you know
Yeah.
what I've found too, because when you're any of those things that you listed off that people may say because they don't know what to say and they're uncomfortable, they might not remember it. But after going through therapy and I remember those things in my brain and I hold on to it. And in my head, I'm like, how could you like say such a thing as when are you going to get over it? But then when I talk to that person about it, that I don't even remember saying that.
So what do we do instead?
Yeah.
Right. First, we don't shut down and feel bad and like feel like we can't do anything and we won't get it right. And, or feel guilty because you're like, oh, damn, I've said that. Right?
Yeah.
We've all done these
Yeah.
things. We've all done
Right.
unconscious things. It's okay. We forgive ourselves and, try to do better next time. I think what I have experienced and certainly talking with a lot of people who've gone through grief, is especially patients, is listening is probably the most important and
Mhm.
kindest thing that you can do for somebody. Really bringing your full presence to the conversation. And, we don't want to beat ourselves up. We don't want to shame ourselves. We don't want to, be unforgiving towards ourselves because we always make mistakes. It's just about doing better next time. And so, one of the things that I talk about in the book is really being courageous about acknowledging what's happening. So, courageous acknowledgement, saying, I am so sorry for your loss.
Mhm.
Because sometimes we don't know we don't even address it, right? We hide or we
Oh,
try to
yeah.
change the subject or we make it all about us. Like a lot of stuff happens when we're awkward people. And so being able to say, I am so sorry, being able to listen as opposed to filling the conversation with your own anxiety and your own things that even if you think they're positive things, the other person probably may not be ready to hear any of it. They just need a shoulder.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is actually showing up, right? So it's sometimes I know I've done this in the past of like, oh, let me know if you need something,
Mm. Mm-mm.
right?
Mhm. Yep. Yeah.
It's I need you to decide actually because I'm in decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Could you just offer to pick up groceries or walk the dog? Like just offer something as opposed to like
Or just
putting it out to them
yeah.
and then running away.
Bring me some food. Come walk my dog. Come play with them. Come hold my hand. I don't know what I want at this moment, and I don't need to. And
Beautiful.
yeah. Yeah. That's really good. And it's really good for I think that's a lot of good information for people to hear too, because then I have, one of my best friends, he was like, "Am I saying this wrong?" Because it'll be about, like, mental health. Because he's one of the guys. He's like, "Yeah, well, just get over it." He's like, "Wait, I shouldn't say that, should I?" I'm like, "No, you can't say that." He's like, "Okay, I need you to teach me." So I'm gonna send him this podcast. But so I know this has been kind of a heavy conversation. I want to know 5 very unique things about Kris Carr that maybe nobody knows, like fun things.
Oh, geez, fun things that nobody knows about Kris Carr. My gosh, that's a great question. I love interior design. So
You do.
part of my grief process was like redecorating my house because it's just so lovely to be able to go, I am going to make a room beautiful. I am going to put creativity into my space. I'm going to create a sanctuary where I can heal. And that's something that I've been doing for quite some time because just makes me happy.
It's an art, and I always say,
Yeah.
like, art is a great place for your mental health. My mom was an artist, and I have all her paints, and I have do art as well and paint, but I haven't done it in 2 years. But I finally slowly have set up an art table, brought out some of her paintbrushes. I got paints and I'm like almost there. Like painting to me is so therapeutic.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible.
But then a
Yeah.
beautiful space, like, and I see, is this your office behind you?
This is my office behind me, and before you came on, my husband helps me, like your husband helps you, and I was like, "I think I want an accent wall with wallpaper here," and then you came
Oh
on, and
yeah.
like, "I think I want a seagrass. I think I need a Philip Jeff."
Mm.
He's like, "Okay, honey, we gotta do the podcast."
But you've got plants. I just bought like a whole bunch of plants for my favorite room in the house where I meditate, where I read, where I open the doors and have the fresh air. Like it's just creating a special little zen place for you is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I also love scary movies, so that's the
Do
second thing.
you?
Mhm. I love scary
Wow.
movies. I watch scary movies oftentimes with my best friend because she's the only person who will watch them. My husband won't watch them with me, and
Same.
she
My
loves
husband hates them.
completely. And when I tell people that, they're like, "That's not good for your nervous system," and I'm like, I actually think it is in some ways. It flexes my nervous system.
That's
Uh,
fun.
yeah, so that would be a second thing, and I just wanna come back to what you said because, I believe this to be true, and I know it can be true for quite some time, that this is like when you said this is a really heavy conversation.
Mhm.
I was talking to my friend Gabby Bernstein recently, who you probably know, and
Yeah, she was on the pod. Yeah, of course.
we were talking about how her last book, Happy Days, and this book, I'm Not a Morning Person, is actually our both of our biggest books about manifesting
Mhm.
and biggest books about living fully
Mhm.
and biggest books about creating beautiful lives. And I think that a lot of times people shy away from these conversations or these books. Or I remember, Karina, when I was talking about writing a book about grief, and publishers were saying, "Grief doesn't sell. Are you sure?"
Mm, mm. Oh, I've gotten that. When I wrote my memoir about growing up with a schizophrenic mom and my suicide attempt and drug use and misuse and then coming out over it, and I had 2 Tone It Up books, New York Times bestseller, and publishers were like, "Can you make this more about wellness and fitness and happy?" I'm like, "No, this is my life."
Yeah,
And
and truth is this is the heart of wellness,
mhm,
you know.
absolutely.
And so I just want to share that because if anybody out there, and probably not because they're tuning into your incredible work and your podcast, so they're more willing to do this work. If anybody out there gets stuck in that idea that this is too heavy to go towards, um, that you lean on that courage because the process of going through is really so magnificent and opens us up to much deeper, richer experiences, I think.
Yeah, and it is, I love having those heavy conversations with my friends and then laughing later and just getting together
Yeah.
and being like, "This is life. This is life. It's it's life." So,
Yeah.
3 you have 3 more things that maybe fun things that people don't know about Kris Carr.
Some things that people don't know about Kris Carr. I like to, I'll just say more things because a lot of the stuff comes out with my best friend. I'd like to threaten her by sending her like very awful dog figurines
Okay.
because she likes a very pruned and zen like space with no extra. And
Mm.
so I like to text her terrible, terrible figurines of poodles and Pekingese and things of this nature. So there's another one.
Okay.
These are very random. I'm
I love it.
pulling, going into the random box here. Um, I what else can I tell you? What two other things that people don't know about me? I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't know about me. Um, Sometimes I think I miss my calling, and I've fantasized about being an FBI profiler.
Wow.
So that is something because I love watching crime shows and detective shows and stuff like that. I'm not good with blood though.
Okay, that would be a problem.
So that would be a problem. And I have a bit of a temper at times. So
Oh.
that could be like I'd probably blow my cover. You know, I'm not exactly sure, but I do think I might be useful in some way, shape, or form.
Hey, it's never too late for anything until
I
it's too
I
late.
like your positivity there. I like your sense of encouragement. I think I'm gonna pass that on to my husband because he pretty much has shut that down. But, yeah, and what else? Oh, I played the saxophone when I was a child because my mom wouldn't let me play the drums, and so which was the instrument that I really wanted to play, and so we had to choose another instrument, so I chose the saxophone, which is a lot worse for a parent to deal with,
Yeah,
I think, than drums.
I would
Um,
agree.
yeah,
Does your mom now wish that she let you play the drums?
well, the saxophone only lasted 5 years, but the desire for drums has never gone away,
It's never
and
too
so,
late.
that is one of the never too lates. This I like because my husband said, "What do you want for your birthday?" I'm turning 50,
Drums.
and I said, "I want a drum set.
Mhm. Mhm. Drum set and wallpaper.
I want a drum set and wallpaper."
That's it. Was that 5? I think so, right?
I think we hit the 5.
All right. So, your new book, I'm Not a Morning Person, great book, coming out September 19th. And if everyone wants more Kris Carr, where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. They can go to kriscarr.com and they can go to Instagram, which is at Crazy Sexy Kris.
And we'll put it all in the show notes and all over social and all the good stuff. Thank you, Kris.
Thanks for having me.
The big silence. The big silence. The big silence.